Are we up and running? All right, Jonathan's got me going. All right. You know, it's kind of funny to me that my voice usually carries the well that I don't know why I need this, but they kind of like for me to have it because we're going out online, and so I understand that part of it. So how's everybody doing this morning? You know, if I'm going to look at you, I need to take these off. I am not going to get used to this anytime soon, but I would not give up my cataract surgery for anything. I would do it again in a heartbeat, because without these I can see everybody. I can't read without them. But it is certainly good to see everybody that's here this morning. And I know we've got some that are joining us online, and several, that's been a great thing, is having everything to go out online. It makes it accessible to so many more people. I know the day's coming. I hope it's a long way down the road, but the day's coming when I'm not going to be able to get out like I am now and go and do things. And it's great that that's available. We're still in chapter 15 of Matthew, and now we're starting to get into what things are going to start to try Jesus a little bit. Remember in our study of Mark that we did, a couple of years ago? In our study of Mark, when Jesus and his disciples set out toward Jerusalem, we called it the road trip with Jesus. And it didn't take long on that journey before the disciples were just like those two little kids in the back seat. You know, one of them reaches over and touches the other one, and the fight's on. He touched me, and everybody is in an uproar, and finally Dad slams on the brakes and said, if you don't stop this, we're going to turn this car around and nobody's going. Well, Jesus didn't get to that point, but you could just feel it in the account of this trip to Jerusalem. In chapter 15, we're going to start in verse 29. Okay, after the Canaanite woman encountered Jesus and asked that her daughter be healed, and Jesus, he sent her away. He said it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. The lesson here came to the disciples. Jesus was not using this as an opportunity to be mean to this woman, but he's using it as a teaching point. She says in front of his disciples so that they should be able to hear it. Well, even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Okay, a lesson there. Now, moving on to verse 29. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up on a mountainside and sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. Okay. It seems like wherever Jesus goes, there's a lot of this that happens. If you were a part of this group, do you think these things would leave an impression on you? Do you think it might make you stop and realize just who Jesus is? Keep that in mind. Keep your answer in mind for that. Okay. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. Sound familiar? Go back to chapter 15. We're in chapter 15. Okay, I had this wrote down, but go back to where he feeds the 5,000. Okay. Go back and look at that. Now, where were his disciples? Where were they? Did they miss that or something? I mean, Jesus had them pass out the food and take up what was left over. So they were involved. Here we are again, and the people have come to Jesus and they're hungry. Okay, what do the disciples have to say here? Jesus said, these people are hungry. We need to feed them. Where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? Okay, remember how these disciples, they're right there with Jesus, and yet they somehow let it slip their mind. Well, Jesus took care of this earlier. What does Jesus do? Okay, you don't have to ask, what would he do? We can look right here and we see what he actually did. Okay, how many loaves do you have? How many? Well, before, what'd they have? 5 loaves, 2 fish? 7, they replied, and a few small fish. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Does this not sound just like what he did earlier? Exactly. Now, if you had been there that first time when Jesus fed 5,000, you think you would have remembered that? I would. I mean, it's, I can remember certain things that I thought were miracles at the time. It left an impression on me. I said, well, if it happened once, it can happen again, right? Or do we have that tendency not to remember those things unless it's something bad? Yes, and you know, Jesus had that ability to make this happen. He did it the first time and showed them, right? And yet here it seems like, well, they've lost confidence. Well, he's not going to do it. Maybe he has a reason. Maybe he can't do it. They don't know. But the question is, how are we going to feed these people? It's like they forgot about it. It's almost like doubt has come into their mind. And Jesus does it again. Now, I find it difficult, but yet not impossible for them to push that out of their remembrance that Jesus has done this before. I don't know why, but for some reason they question. They don't have the faith. And they took up 7 baskets. The number of those who ate was 4,000, besides women and children. After Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got into the boat and went to the vicinity of Magadan. Okay, back-to-back chapters here. Jesus feeds a large group of people. How many is 5,000 men, not including women and children? I would say that's pretty close to the town of Canyon, right? Now, would that not be something to kind of leave something on your memory? This is showing us that these disciples were human, right? Okay, what does Jesus do with them? Go to Acts and read what happened in Acts from these disciples, and you see, okay, Jesus took these people right here and did that. Kind of makes you think, well, what excuse do we have? Do we have an excuse? You know, Jesus kind of eliminates excuses, doesn't he? Okay.
This is a pretty good example of it being in church. But anytime we have a dinner in the church, we always have to take something.
Exactly.
I don't know what we stand back here.
Well, but what Jesus is saying, with him, we can do all things, right? Okay, and they seem to have said, well, how are we going to feed these people? Jesus could have just said, do you remember not long ago when there were more people than this? Here he's done it twice. He's fed a large crowd of people with very little. Now, and again, one key that Steve brought out right there, what does Jesus do before he feeds these people? Well, he did, but when they said he gave thanks. Okay. You ever eat something you weren't thankful for? I ate meals in the Army. I had to be thankful for it, but even if our cooks got a hold of it, it was probably not going to be worth eating. You know, that's why I preferred the sea rations. I know our cooks never touched those. But I have been so hungry before that I was thankful for anything. Okay, 2 feedings. Now, only Matthew and Mark record record both of these. Jesus, he seems amazed that his disciples, after seeing this the first time, they doubt his ability, or they don't think he's capable or whatever of doing it again. Okay, let's go on here, because now we're starting to get into the part where what Jesus is trying to do, he's really going to start stepping on toes, and they're going to start kicking back. The Pharisees and Sadducees. Okay, the two groups that pretty much were in charge of the education, they were the ones entrusted to provide the teachings of the law to the Jewish people. I don't know if entrusted is the proper word here, but they set themselves up. They educated themselves highly. They took a legalistic approach. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. Okay, remember back earlier, they did this same thing. Give us a sign so that we will know. And Jesus replies in the same way. When the evening comes, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away. Okay, this in its own way, you look at this is Jesus predicting his death. What is the sign of Jonah? What happened?
Three days in the belly of the fish.
Exactly. Jonah got swallowed up, and he's in that fish's belly for 3 days. Fish, God finally brings that great fish up to the shore, makes him throw up and get rid of Jonah. Now, that's kind of a nasty description, but that's the way it worked, wasn't it? Yeah. Now, how many of you ever been fishing? I'm sure that is most of you, right? Okay. Are fish a different type of creature than we're used to? They're kind of wet and slimy. They're cold-blooded. When you catch the fish, before you can cook them, what do you have to do? Well, it's not a pleasant task, is it? It's kind of nasty. How would you like to live in one of them's belly for 3 days? That's not very appealing. Okay. And he's in there for 3 days. You know, I remember talking about this one time to a high school class. There was a girl in there. And we're talking about Jonah being in that fish's belly. And she said, I would rather die. I said, now you see what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is going to do the same thing. He's going to be swallowed up. He's going to be buried in the ground. And he's going to be there for 3 days. And he is going to rise again. Just like Jonah came back out of that fish. That's the sign of Jonah. Jesus is talking about it. Now, when they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. Here we are back on this again. The disciples forgot to take bread. They said, well, he's done it twice. Think he'll do it again? He's going to make a teaching point here. They forgot to take bread. Be careful, Jesus said to them. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They discussed this among themselves and said, it is because we didn't bring any bread. You ever go to work unprepared? What's the first thing you do to prepare? Well, you make sure that, okay, sometime in the middle of the day, I'm going to eat something. I either need to take something with me, or I need to make sure that it's available somewhere that I can obtain something to eat, right? You think about that? Sure. I do. Okay. And here they come, and they go to the other side of the lake with Jesus, and they don't have any bread. And Jesus says, well, you need to be careful. That you need to make sure that you're on guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Okay. Jesus is not just saying, well, you should have brought some bread. He's using this as a different teaching point. Be careful. The yeast of the Pharisees. Now, I know a lot of people in here have probably tried their hand at baking, right? Yeah? No? Anybody in here cook? You ever tried to bake? I can make tortillas. I cannot make a loaf of bread because you got to get that worked in there, and you got to get that yeast to leaven that whole loaf and make it rise and make it fluffy and delicious. Can't do that. I can open a can of biscuits, but I do know that what that yeast does. I know what it's in there for. Now, a friend of mine who was a chuck wagon cook, I have talked with him about his biscuits that he made in the Dutch oven. And I kept noticing he had a little bit left over. And I said, are these sourdough? And he said, yes. I said, well, what is this? He said, this is for the next batch. It's a starter. The yeast that Jesus is talking about here is be careful of the influence of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Don't be like them. Don't get caught up in their influence. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? How is it you don't understand that I was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees? Okay, Jesus, he's used all of this to make teaching points, hasn't he? He taught me just by feeding the 5,000 and the 4,000. Well, he said, be careful. Here, after all of that, they didn't bring any bread with them. And Jesus said, okay, you're over here talking among yourselves, but the lesson here, the Pharisees and Sadducees, they said, we want a sign. We want a sign. Several times, didn't the disciples ask Jesus for some kind of sign? They did. What did Jesus say? The sign of Jonah. He talks about that here in recent chapters twice. He's talked about it before. Jesus is going to be in the earth 3 days and nights, and he's going to come forth. He's going to rise. This is the kingdom Jesus is talking about, not a political kingdom. Okay, let's continue. Now we're going to get into a solid point here that Jesus is not going to necessarily teach the disciples. He's already taught them to this point. He's going to bring it out of them. One way, and I'm going to use myself as an example. And this started way back with my mother. She's giving me instructions. And then after the instructions, I go off, and then when I come back, she says, did you get that done? I said, what? It got to the point she would give me instructions, and every man in here can relate to this. After those instructions, what did I just say? Repeat it back to me. You remember those? I do. And if I couldn't repeat it back, there was a price to pay. Mom wanted her point right here. Okay, and Jesus has done this with his disciples. Now, beginning here in verse 13 of chapter 16, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? Okay, this has happened before, hasn't it? People want to know who Jesus is, and everybody's got some opinion. And Jesus said, well, who do the people say that I am? I love Peter. Peter is a very impulsive disciple of Jesus. And I mean, he can be aggressive, rough and gruff. He can jump to the front of the line. And later on, you look at what Peter wrote, and Peter has become one of the gentlest, most loving disciples of Jesus. Peter is going to be the one that Jesus gets this out of. Who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Let's look at these groups here. Okay, all of these people were prominent in delivering the message of God, right? Yes. They were teachers. They were instructed by God. And a lot of people say, well, that's who you are. Okay, can you understand why people said these things? To a point, yes, I can. Because they really didn't know who Jesus was, because they were looking for the Messiah who was going to overthrow the Romans and all the other worldly governments and set up Israel as the ruling nation for all the world. Basically, in a nutshell, that's what they were looking for. Now, okay, that's who people say that Jesus is. That was an easy enough question, they thought. But Jesus is not through, is he? Who do you say? Okay, now when someone puts the question directly at you, do you have to kind of shift gears and come back into focus here? Who do you say? You know, I can just see my face. Huh? Me? Who do you say that I am? Okay, now, Simon Peter, he's going to jump to the front. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Can't get any plainer than that, can it? You are the Christ. Okay, now, stop and think for a minute here. Jesus has taught them to this point, and this has come from them, come from Simon Peter, as, okay, you've learned. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. Okay, why do you think he told them not to tell anyone? It's not time yet, right? All things revealed in their time. Now, I'm going to back up here a little bit, and we're going to look at this. How often have we studied this one passage here where Simon says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, and then what Jesus says after? How many times have we studied that? I can remember every Bible class I was in and countless sermons where this was the subject matter. And one of the things we have to do, does anyone have a Greek interlinear Bible besides me? Okay, the one that I have, I've got 3 bilingual Bibles. One of these, one column, it's in Greek, the original Greek that this was written in. And I have even taken this passage and gone back and looked at that with my interlinear, my Greek. The other column is in English, like I understand. I'm not going to say I speak it. But, okay, there's some things we need to understand about language. Jesus said, you are Peter. Go back to that original language, and the best way that I can explain this, our language, not so much. Everything in other languages is either masculine or feminine. Even if it's something that's not alive. kind of hard for us to understand that, isn't it? Well, that's it. You know, how many of you took Spanish in high school? Few of you? Okay. You learned that, didn't you? Everything is masculine or feminine. How do you say "thee" in Spanish? Six different ways. Depends on whether it's singular, plural, whether it's masculine or feminine. I mean, there's so many different ways. And then you think, well, how do you know you got the right one? It comes with the language. That was one of the hardest things for me to understand when I started learning. In our language, we don't do that. But in that original Greek, Peter, his name was Petros, a stone. But it's also a proper name for a man. And it is masculine. Every language that I have studied, the word for stone, like the rocks that we have out here on the ground, is a feminine word. And it's kind of, it's not a proper name. It's not capitalized or anything. It's just a word. Now, Jesus said, "You are Peter. You're a stone. You're not movable." And when you break it down, I know 4 different words in Spanish for rock. One of these is for a little rock. They're talking rocks for a sling. They're also talking those mile marker stones that they had out, because if Roman soldiers said, "Carry my stuff," you got to carry it a mile. And you had that mile marked out with a stone. You can move it. The word stone that Peter's name comes from is also something like a mountain. You don't move that. Jesus is saying this is solid and it's not going to move. And on this rock, not Peter, on this rock that's not going to move, this is what I'm going to build my church. That rock is his confession. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay, how many of you heard that Peter's first pope because of this? I've heard that. The language doesn't support that at all. Okay, I'm running short on time, I'm pretty sure, because Steve, the welcoming committee, has left. Do we have any questions over what we've covered so far? I know I haven't covered any of it as well as I'd like to. But I'll try my best to answer any questions. The confession that Jesus is the Christ is what it's all built on. And this is a very powerful statement. Okay. No questions? I'm thinking I'm about out of time. So, I'm going to stop right there. Let's pray. Our loving God and Father in heaven, we thank you so much for the day you've given us. And again, another wonderful opportunity to praise your holy name. We ask that you be with us as we worship you. May our worship be pleasing in your sight. Forgive us, Father, of our sins. This we ask in the name of your Son. Amen.